Welcome class, thank you again for joining me for this notes video. Today we're working on 1-6, which is going to be absolute value. This is going to be a 2-day lesson. We're going to spend 1 day talking about absolute value equations, and then we're going to come back and talk about absolute value inequalities. Now just to review the basics of absolute value, what we're talking about in general is the distance from zero. That is what you learned back in Algebra 1, back in middle school. So again, what we're talking about is that it can take a number and basically the mathematical operation, it takes off a sign if it has one. So if it's already negative, then it becomes positive, or if it's already positive, it just stays positive. Now, this first page of examples is something I would actually like to go over in class with you. So we're not really going to discuss this first sheet because it's a conversation I'd like to have in class. What I'd like to do is review what you learned in your previous classes, all right? Because you've learned this before. This first part should basically be a review. So if I just give you an absolute value equation, what I'm looking for you to remember is there are two solutions, all right? Because that x minus 8 could actually equal 6. Or if that x minus 8 happened to be negative 6, that absolute value would wipe off that sign and it would still just end up equaling positive 6. So when you're solving these absolute values, what you should remember, you are always getting two equations. Right? You're getting an equation with a positive here and a negative. Two separate equations that you need to solve. All right? Once you have those two equations, now you just solve them like we always do. So here, add 8 to both sides. So x equals 14. Add 8 to both sides, x equals 2. And you get your two solutions. Now, we're also going to get back to this, what does it mean? We're going to do that part in class together as well. Right now, I simply like to focus on the two skills solving these equations. Now, for our next one, again, we have the same situation going on. So I need to make my two equations that x plus 3 could actually equal 5. Or, because it's an absolute value, if that x plus 3 equaled negative 5, the absolute value would wipe the sign off and it would still simply equal 5. So here we have our two equations. Again, focusing on getting our two signs, the positive and the negative, because of the absolute value. Once we separate it into those two equations, now we simply solve. Subtract 3 from both sides. And over here, subtract 3 from both sides. And we have our two solutions now. So again, that is always our goal. We need to find a way to get our two solutions. Oh, I apologize. The third example is actually still on this page. Now, this does lead to some interesting things. So, what about this situation? What about when the absolute value already equals something that is negative? This leads to a big problem because an absolute value can only equal a positive value. Remember, the first example I did, basically the absolute value wipes off the negative sign. So if the value we're talking about must be positive, this equation is not possible, okay? This is going to be a no solution situation. There's no way to have an absolute value equal a negative value. So whenever you come across this situation, you don't actually have to do any solving. All you have to say, no solution. All right, now these absolute values, recall, these can get slightly more complicated, right? We can have some junk like in example 4. Now, the goal here, before we try to separate it out into our two equations, we need to get the absolute value by itself. So I'm going to make a little note here to isolate the absolute value. Okay? That's our first goal. We have to get the absolute value by itself. And we do that with the same steps we would use to solving an equation. So notice here, I have a 3 multiplying it and a 2 adding to my absolute value. So recall, solving an equation, you deal with addition and subtraction first. So I'm going to take care of that 2 first. I'm going to subtract it to the other side. Oh, not minus 3. I'm going to minus 2 to both sides. So I have 3, absolute values of 9 minus, or x minus 9 equals 3. Now, I still have that 3 multiplying my absolute value, so I need to take care of that. I'm going to divide both sides of my equation by 3. So the absolute value of x minus 9 equals 1. So I've taken care of that first step. I've isolated my absolute value. My absolute value is completely by itself. Perfect. Now, once you do that, now you separate it into your 2 equations. All right? So, what this is telling me, x minus 9 could actually be 1. Or, that same x minus 9 could equal negative 1 because absolute value would wipe off that sign. So I'm getting my 2 equations by taking the negative and the positive. And from there now, I just finish solving. So I add 9 to both sides. So x equals 10. Add 9 to both sides. X equals 8. All right, last example for this first note. So here I need to keep in mind my 2 steps. So first, isolate the absolute value. Well, in this case, I've actually already done that. The absolute value is already by itself, right? It's simply absolute value of 2x minus 4. So I'm ready to separate it into my 2 equations. So that 2x minus 4 could actually equal that 10 minus x. Or that 2x minus 4 could equal the opposite of 10 minus x. So, by equaling the opposite of 10 minus x, again, we're getting that positive and negative relationship in our 2 equations, the positive of that right-hand side and the negative of that right-hand side. So, I'm going to take that negative and distribute it through right away, okay? So that's going to be a negative 10 plus x, all right? Just to take care of that negative right off the bat. Now, both of these equations, again, are ready to solve. Now, notice, both of them have the variable on both sides of the equation. So the first thing I want to do is take care of that. So if I'm looking at my left-hand equation, to take care of my variable being on both sides, I'm going to add that x. Because now it combines to 3x on that side of my equation. And it's dropped off the other side. Once I have this, my variable on one side, now I'm going to take care of the constant. I'm going to add that 4 to both sides. So 3x equals 14. Divide that 3, that's multiplying my x. And I get x equals 14/3 for that one. Looking at my right-hand equation, I'm going to subtract that x from both sides this time, because that'll cancel it off of that side. So now I have x minus 4 equals negative 10. Add 4 to both sides, and x equals negative 6. So there are my two answers for this last one. Again, the two things to remember whenever you're solving these absolute value equations. First, isolate the absolute value. Get the absolute value completely by itself. Second, you need to split up the absolute value into two equations and solve both from there. So I'm going to cut off on this video. So we'll begin with that first discussion in class tomorrow, and then we will have our practice time. So thank you for joining me, and please finish wrapping up taking these notes, and I will see you in class.